What does it really take to decolonize a mind? Well, for two of India's greatest thinkers, Mahatma Gandhi and Rabindranath Tagore, the answer wasn't on a battlefield. Nope, it was in the classroom. This is the incredible story of how they fought a quiet war for India's very soul, using education as their weapon to tear down an empire and build a new nation from the inside out.
So here's where we're headed. We're going to start with the problem they were up against, the colonial classroom. Then we'll dive into Gandhi's super practical solution and contrast that with Tagore's more poetic vision. We'll even put their ideas head to head. And the best part? We'll see how this century-old debate is still incredibly alive and is actually shaping the future of education in India today.
All right, so to really get what they were trying to do, we have to understand the mess they were trying to fix. The British education system in India, well, it wasn't really about teaching. It was a tool of control, built specifically for the needs of an empire.
Yeah, Gandhi really didn't pull any punches here. He saw it for exactly what it was. This system was never meant to create Indian leaders or thinkers. Its whole purpose was to churn out a workforce. It was basically an assembly line for clerks, people who could help keep the giant machine of the British Empire running.
And the damage? Man, it was deep. It taught generations of Indians to be embarrassed by their own culture. By forcing English on everyone, it created this massive gap between a tiny, westernized elite and, well, everybody else. Instead of teaching kids how to think, it just taught them how to memorize. And maybe worst of all, in a country full of farmers and craftsmen, it taught zero practical skills, leaving millions completely unprepared for life.
So out of all this frustration, the Swadesi movement was born, and it was this powerful act of defiance, a call for self-reliance. It wasn't just about, not buying foreign stuff. It was about rejecting foreign systems entirely. The thinking was pretty simple. Look, political freedom means nothing if your mind is still colonized. And that had to start with an education system built by Indians for Indians.
And that is the perfect setup for our first visionary, Mahatma Gandhi. He didn't just complain about the old system. He came up with a totally radical, totally practical alternative designed for the soul of India.
He called it Nai Talim, which means basic education. And the core idea was just revolutionary in its simplicity. Learning should not be separated from living. A real education had to connect what you learn in your mind with the work you do with your hands.
He boiled this all down into this really elegant formula, the 3 H's. For Gandhi, an education that only trained the head, critical thinking, was totally incomplete. It also had to train the heart by teaching values like truth and compassion. And most importantly, it had to engage the hands through actual productive work. You couldn't have one without the others. Real knowledge came from putting them all together.
So what would this actually look like? Well, picture a classroom where instead of a textbook, you have a spinning wheel. Or maybe a small farm. The school itself makes and sells things to pay its own bills. And the language being spoken isn't English, it's the local language, keeping kids connected to their own culture. This wasn't just a school, right? It was a blueprint for a self-reliant village. Okay, so at the very same time, another giant of Indian thought was tackling the exact same problem. Rabindranath Tagore felt the same outrage as Gandhi, but his solution was aimed at something different, not self-reliance, but self-expression. A vision all about freedom, art, and nature.
For Tagore, the colonial school was, pure and simple, a prison. He had this powerful metaphor of a parrot in a cage, just being force-fed lessons until its spirit was totally crushed. He was convinced the system murdered creativity, and, by locking kids up in buildings, it cut them off from the greatest teacher of all, the natural world.
So what was his solution? Well, he basically built the exact opposite of a cage. At his school, Santiniketan, there were hardly any walls. Classes happened out under the trees. Art, music, and dance weren't just after-school activities. They were the very core of how you developed as a whole person. And the teacher wasn't some scary figure at the front of the room, but more of a guide, a fellow traveler helping students find their own way.
So let's just pause here for a second. We've got these two incredible, powerful visions, both born from the exact same struggle against colonialism, but with some really fascinating and really important differences.
And this right here, this is where you really see the split. Gandhi's vision was super practical, focused on nationalism. He wanted to build a self-reliant India from the villages up, using practical crafts. Tagore, on the other hand, was more of an idealist, an internationalist. He was aiming for a kind of universal humanism through the arts and sciences. One was building a nation from the soil, the other was reaching for the sky.
So why does any of this matter now? I mean, this was 100 years ago, right? Well, because this debate, it is not over. Not by a long shot. In fact, the ideas of these two men are more relevant than ever, and you can see them woven into the very DNA of India's education policy today.
You don't have to look any further than India's National Education Policy of 2020. This huge reform isn't just some modern document. It's a conversation with the past. It's this ambitious attempt to finally bring together the powerful, sometimes competing, visions of both Gandhi and Tagore into one single plan for the 21st century.
You can just see Gandhi's fingerprints all over this thing. The huge emphasis on vocational training and practical skill-based education, that is pure Nai Talim. The big push for learning by doing and using the mother tongue for young kids, these are direct echoes of his philosophy, right down to the goal of creating a self-reliant nation, or Atmanirbhar Bharat. And yet, at the exact same time, you can hear Tagore's voice just as loud and clear. The policies drive to tear down the walls between arts and sciences, its focus on creativity instead of just memorizing stuff, and all this new flexibility for students to design their own education. This is a full-on attack on that caged parrot school that Tagore fought against his entire life.
So this all leaves us with a really big question, for all of us. In a world with AI, where any fact is just a Google search away and robots can do so many jobs, what is education even for? Do we need Gandhi's focus on tangible skills, on learning by hand, to keep us grounded? Or do we need Tagore's focus on limitless creativity, on learning with nature, to truly set us free? India's new answer, it seems, is we need both. The real question for the rest of the world is, have we even started asking?